Can a mortal man rob God?
Yes, please.
Yes, through tithes and offerings.
The true meaning of robbing God, restoring the covenant of giving. Every week, Malachi chapter 3 verse 10 is used to encourage believers to give to the church treasury. We are familiar with the warning. Will a mere mortal rob God, yet you rob me, in tithes and offerings? But how do we actually rob God? To understand this, we must realize that God does not need our money. He doesn't go hungry. The primary purpose of bringing the tithe into the storehouse was so that there would be food in the house of God. And who was that food for? It was for the priests serving in the temple and the vulnerable, the orphans, the widows, the strangers, and the less fortunate. As Deuteronomy chapter 14 points out, the tithe was meant to satisfy the Levites, who had no inheritance of their own, alongside the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow. The warning to the priests. The common assumption is that everyday people were forgetting to give, but the historical reality is different. Everyday Israelites were diligent from childhood in obeying the law. The issue wasn't a lack of giving. The issue was that the priests were breaking God's covenant with the tribe of Levi. In Malachi chapter 2, God explicitly states, "And now, you priests." This warning is for you. Double quotes. How were they breaking the covenant? Malachi chapter 3 verse 5 tells us, they were defrauding laborers, oppressing widows and the fatherless, and depriving foreigners of justice. The priests had become greedy, hoarding the benefits of the temple and completely disregarding the poor.
Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, blind guides, hypocrites! For you devour widows' houses, therefore you will receive greater condemnation.
Christ and the doctrine of almsgiving. Fast forward to the time of Jesus. The Pharisees and Sadducees loved money and continued this systemic neglect. Jesus fiercely condemned this hypocrisy in Matthew chapter 23, saying, "You give a tenth of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, but you have neglected the more important matters of the law: justice, mercy, and faithfulness." Early church leaders, like John Chrysostom, pronounced Chris ostom, and Augustine described this as straining out a gnat, but swallowing a camel. The gnat represents minor external rules. The camel represents serious heart sins, like greed and a lack of love. Jesus did not condemn the system of tithing itself. He condemned the corruption of its purpose. When Jesus told the rich young ruler to sell his possessions, he didn't say, "Give the proceeds to the temple." He said, "Give to the poor." The ancient church manual, the Didache, echoes this clearly. "Every first fruit thou shalt take and give to the prophets. But if ye have not a prophet, give it to the poor." Early church fathers went even further. Basil the Great wrote, "The bread you keep belongs to the hungry." The apostolic pattern. This does not mean we stop giving to the church. The Apostle Paul clearly organized collections for the ministry. In 1 Corinthians chapter 9, Paul defends the rights of ministers, stating that those who plow and thresh should share in the harvest. The New Testament maintains a beautiful balance. The ministers of the word and the poor share the resources of the church community. We see this in Acts chapter 6, when the apostles appointed 7 spirit-filled leaders, specifically to ensure that widows were not overlooked in the daily distribution of food. They refused to let the ministry to the weak fall by the wayside. As the apostle James famously wrote, "Faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead." Conclusion. Giving offerings to the church is a good and biblical practice. But if our hearts are greedy and we completely neglect the poor, the needy, and the destitute, our offerings become unclean in the eyes of God. The true sin of robbing God in Malachi was a failure of justice and mercy by the leadership. Today, modern churches and we as individuals in our financial abundance must ask ourselves the same question. Are we using our resources for their true, God-ordained purpose? Or are we too robbing God by forgetting the very people He commanded us to
Bible
protect.
teachers and pastors are using the book of Malachi to manipulate Christian members into giving money.
They spend millions to establish mega churches instead of helping the poor members of the church.
I am living in the end time Bible prophecy. If you want to know more, click the subscribe button down there. The Wood Source One.